Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. In the first story, we'll tell you how the combined efforts of the employees got what they wanted from their boss. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Boss said we needed permission from him to take a break during our shift. Many moons ago, I worked at a residential treatment center doing direct care with teens. While in most jobs, breaks are a built-in and guaranteed part of the workday, this was not the case here. We had compliance concerns around mandatory staff-to-client ratios, and this often made it difficult, sometimes impossible, to get a break during your shift. That being said, most of us working the line had a pretty good system worked out for trying to get folks a break. If we happened to notice that all of the kids and staff were present on the unit at the same time, we'd have someone take a break and then hold off on moving on with programming until they'd returned. After working there for approximately 2 years, the guy who ran the residential unit was let go for stealing from the clients. Real nice guy. At this point, they hired a new guy to take over. He'd not worked at our agency before. He'd never done direct care himself before, but he did have experience in administrative positions in agencies similar to ours. He came in as most administrators do that have no experience of the job and thought he knew best about everything. Pretty quickly, he became concerned that we were taking advantage of taking breaks throughout the day, which could not have been further from the truth. Again, most days, if you were lucky, you got one break at all, and that includes while working double shifts. So he came up with the plan that in order to take a break, you needed his permission. During the daytime when he was present at the unit, this was not a huge deal as you could simply walk over and ask him. This immediately became a problem, however, for staff working evening, overnight, and weekend shifts who would need to call him to get permission. Anywho, I'm someone who's always following the rules. So during my first shift, I was shift supervisor and therefore responsible for the other staff working during my shifts. I asked everyone to please do as he had asked. By the end of the first shift, not one person had gotten a break. Each time we had an opportunity, ratio-wise, we'd give him a call, which he wouldn't answer. By the time he called back 30 minutes to an hour later, the opportunity was gone. When I showed up the next day, I explained to him what had happened the previous evening and asked him to reconsider. He refused. So I did what any logical person would do. I told my staff to call him when they wanted a break. If he didn't answer, they were to call again and again until we reached him. He probably received upwards of 40 phone calls that shift. I should note of which he answered none. Sadly, this did not result in any of us getting a break that night, but by the time I showed up for my shift the next day, we had an email from him letting us know we no longer needed to call him and get his permission for breaks. And our next story. Hurt my friend? I will lose all of my chill. Growing up, I had a friend we'll call Dave. As far as we ever knew, Dave was likely the result of a mother who had been doing a number of pills for most of her pregnancy, as well as heavy drinking. When he was around 4, his mother dumped him and his little brother with his grandmother and promptly ended up in jail for attempting to rob a bank. His grandmother decided that his younger brother was an angel and he somehow was evil. Dave had issues. Doctors said he had all the signs of antisocial personality disorder at around 12 and ended up being sent to a special school where he basically retracted farther and farther from human interaction, that is, aside from with me. Dave was inhumanely smart, liked sports, could play any musical instrument that you handed him within a week, and we had basically everything in common. In spite of what doctors and his family seemed to think, Dave was a totally great person. He was such a good friend that one time when he came to me and admitted that he had feelings for a girl I was dating and she admitted to liking him, I immediately gave them both my blessing and remained friends with him. Not her, though. She, for some reason, was angry that I was not upset that they were happy. That's another story, though. Dave and I ended up taking martial arts together for several years. It was an awesome outlet for me since I was homeschooled and didn't get to meet many people, and him since he turned out to be amazingly talented at martial arts. I was not shocked by this. The thing was, as cool a guy as Dave was with me and our tightly packed group of friends, he was in fact a smart-mouthed, sarcastic B-turd. He did not like fighting, but more often than not, I could assume that if Dave was speaking to someone, we were going to end up in a fight. We were 16-year-old boys. Not too bright all around. So Dave's grandmother has decided one day that she would punish him since his little brother had broken down the door to Dave's room. It was obviously Dave's fault for wanting to have privacy, by her logic, and so he was sent to reshingle the roof of his house. This is apparently a fitting punishment for wanting privacy. I found out, and as you do when your buddy needs help, I suddenly found my butt up on a roof with a hammer, pulling off old shingles, and completely terrified of the 2, I just went and looked a few minutes ago, it's not 3, story drop on the other side. While I'm up on the roof, I hear voices. I slowly and fearfully walked my way to the edge of the roof. Almost straight below me, I see a local dealer, we'll call him Fats, everyone else did, threatening Dave. He's threatening him with a bulge in his coat pocket, which no one can see. Now, we live in Baltimore City. There's about a 30% chance that there actually is a gun in that pocket. I'm trying to decide what to do when he pulled his hand out, and to my surprise, he's holding a cheap flea market-style butterfly knife of the kind you get when you're like 12 and think you're a bad dude now. Well, I can only partly remember what happened at that point. He cut Dave, and it was fairly bad. There was instantly blood visible. I then took one step off the roof with the idea in my head that I would land on this effer and kill him. I had completely lost it at the thought that my friend might be dying, and I was totally fine with the idea of going to jail for killing this a-hole. Good/bad news for me, I did not land on him and instead hit the ground directly in front of him, doing damage to my knees that I've never fully recovered from. Good/bad news for him, I did not kill his butt, but when I fell, my forearms came directly down on his collarbone, shattering it in a completely horrifying and magnificent way. How I didn't break my forearm, I don't know, but this kid looked like someone had hit him with a wrecking ball. He screamed and took off right away. I can only assume shock is what kept him awake, because we heard days later that his collarbone had been broken in like 3 places, as had several of the ribs below it from the impact. Dave, as it turns out, had gotten a cut across the forehead and was otherwise fine. It also turns out that Dave was getting ready to hit Fats in the face with a claw hammer when I came falling out of the sky like some tubby, rage-powered meteor. According to him, the sun blacked out for a brief moment, a flash of pale white boy descending from the heavens, and then 2 fat guys on the ground screaming. He had no effing clue what had happened. He helped me inside, and after a bit, we, with all of the expert medical knowledge 2 16-year-olds can muster, reasoned my legs were not broken. I then limped home and went to bed while he went back to working on the roof. We never saw Fats again after that. Turns out a lot of people did not like him, and when he was suddenly completely unable to defend himself, he thought it was a good idea to leave Maryland for good. And our last story. Take my tips for 5 years? You better be prepared to lose your job. This story begins when I was 18 years old, just out of high school. I was working for a very well-known moving company. They're all across the USA and have a great reputation. My uncle works as the GM for this specific branch. I worked during my summer vacations in between college semesters. It was hard effing work. The shifts were from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I lived an hour away from the warehouse, so it was a bit of a commute. I earned a flat rate of $140 a day, so it wasn't much with the hours I was working. The way the job works is drivers coming across the country will dock at our warehouse to either unload or load a shipment. They will then take the shipment to the specific destination. Sometimes these drivers have their own help, but other times they'll hire us to help them out and pay/tip us at the end of the load. Now, I worked under the warehouse manager, who we'll call DH for D-Head. DH is a very nice guy, but when it came to our tips from the drivers, he was a complete A-hat. He would tell the drivers to give our tip money directly to him, and he would distribute it to the rest of us at the end of the week. As you can guess, that would never happen. For the 5 years that I worked there, he did this numerous times to me and the 4 other warehouse workers. We could never catch him in the act until I decided enough was enough. DH was giving the driver I worked with that day a ride to the bank so he could give us our tips. Well, I knew what was going to happen, so when they got back, I immediately asked the driver how much money he gave DH. He said it was $240 for me and DH's brother, who was also helping out the driver. After about an hour with not receiving my tip money, I walked over to DH. I asked him for my tip money, and he looked dumbfounded. "What do you mean?" he asked me. "The driver said he gave you $240 for me and your brother. I want my money." He then said, "This is your pay for the day. I'm giving it to the warehouse so they can pay you at the end of the week." I'd had enough of his BS, so I said, DH, give me the money or else I'm going up the chain. He coughed up the $120 after trying to only give me $40. After I got my money, I told DH's brother I received $120 and that he should go over and get his as well. To no surprise, DH said he didn't have any money. That pissed his brother off, and he told my uncle, the GM, that he wasn't giving us our tips. The upper management knew he'd done this in the past, but hadn't done anything about it because there was never concrete evidence. This was the last straw. After 30 years of working at the same company, he was let go. One of the gentlemen that had worked with me for 5 years busting his butt off got promoted to the warehouse manager. DH is unemployed now, and his brother still works with the company. It felt great to actually be able to stick up for myself and my coworkers. In the end, I felt kind of bad for him losing his job, but I knew what I did was right. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.